She had a PhD in social psychology. 15 years spent teaching students about cognitive biases, the confirmation bias, the attribution error, the Dunning-Kruger effect. She could name them all, define them all, and spot them across a room. And then, in a high-stakes hiring decision, she became her own case study. She was the last person in the room to see what had happened. The more she knew, the more certain she was that she was exempt. That certainty, it turns out, was the bias. We're told that learning about cognitive biases is how you stop falling for them, that awareness is the antidote, that once you understand confirmation bias, you'll catch yourself in the act. Back in 2002, social psychologist Emily Pronin and her colleagues ran a study that most psychology curricula don't highlight, and it changes the entire picture. They found that people consistently rated themselves as significantly less biased than the average person. Not slightly less, significantly. And the critical detail, the most knowledgeable participants showed no reduction in this pattern. Knowing about cognitive biases didn't touch the bias blind spot at all. The belief is that education closes the gap between you and your biases. Pronin and her colleagues found it doesn't. And what you're about to see is that in some cases, the gap grows wider as confidence in your own objectivity increases. Your brain doesn't have a single relationship with bias. It has three. And they don't work the way the textbooks describe. The second one is where it gets dangerous. And most people watching this right now are in it. By the end of this, you'll be able to place yourself exactly on this map, understand why greater knowledge makes 2 of the 3 states worse, and know the one shift that actually moves you forward. And it has nothing to do with knowing more. The conventional wisdom on cognitive biases is elegant. Awareness is the antidote. Read Kahneman, watch the explainers, learn the vocabulary. And once you understand that confirmation bias exists, you'll catch yourself seeking only confirming information, and correct for it. It's why people share articles about cognitive biases in group chats, as if naming the bias to someone else is evidence that you, personally, have already gotten past it. And the logic is sound up to a point. Awareness does change behavior in obvious, low-stakes situations. You know about anchoring bias, so you're more careful about the first number in a negotiation. It works where you're actively on guard. But cognitive bias doesn't specialize in situations where you're on guard. It operates most effectively precisely where you're most confident. And that's a different problem entirely. Dr. Julia Galef spent years researching what actually separates people who consistently see reality more clearly. And her finding was striking. It wasn't how much they knew, it was how they held that knowledge. The people with the best track records for accurate judgment weren't the most educated in their domain. They were the ones who treated their beliefs as hypotheses to test, not positions to defend. She called it the difference between the scout mindset and the soldier mindset. The soldier defends the territory. The scout maps it accurately, even when the map contradicts what they were hoping to find. And most of us, most of the time, are running soldier software. Not because we're unreasonable, because the soldier mode doesn't announce itself. It feels like clear thinking. It feels like logic. That's what makes the difference between level 2 and level 3 invisible from the inside. So if knowledge alone doesn't change which mode your brain is operating in, where does the bias blind spot actually live? And why does knowing about it not move the needle? That requires a framework most people who've studied this have never been shown. There are 3 levels of cognitive blindness. They're not personality types. They're states your relationship with bias can occupy. Most people cycle between them without realizing they've moved. And the dangerous one doesn't look like ignorance. It looks like expertise. Level 1, the unknowing carrier. Level 2, the educated but still blind. Level 3, the intellectually humble. Level 1 is the universal baseline. You hold cognitive biases, confirmation bias, attribution error, availability heuristic, without any awareness that they're actively shaping what you perceive and decide. You simply believe your view of the situation is an accurate report. The failure mode is invisible. You can't see what you don't have the vocabulary to name. But if you're watching this, you've already moved past level 1. You know these terms, which means you're in a different state, and this is where the map gets complicated. Before we move to level 2, I want you to actually do something. Rate yourself right now. On a scale of 1 to 10, how biased do you think you are compared to the average person watching this? Hold that number. Because Emily Pronin ran almost exactly this exercise across multiple studies, and the result was the same every time. Almost everyone rated themselves below average. Not average, below. We can't all be correct. That gap between what you just answered and what's statistically possible, that gap is what Pronin and her colleagues spent their careers documenting. And here's the critical detail. Knowing this study doesn't fix it. You can know this finding, have read this study, and still have just answered below average. That's level 2. If your brain does things like this, things you don't notice until research makes them visible, you're in the right place. Subscribing makes sure the next one reaches you. Most people who have studied psychology, who read books about decision-making, who are watching a video called "The One Bias That Makes You Think You're Immune to Biases," believe they've moved past level 1. And they have. But the move from level 1 to level 2 doesn't reduce the bias blind spot. It changes its shape, in a way that's significantly more dangerous than where you started. Level 2 is the educated but still blind state. You've learned about cognitive biases. You recognize them readily, in news coverage, in arguments that contradict yours, in other people's clearly motivated reasoning. And that recognition has made you more confident in your own objectivity. That confidence is exactly what the bias blind spot predicts. In a 2012 study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, West, Meserve, and Stanovich found that cognitive sophistication, as measured by cognitive ability and analytical thinking scores, did not reduce the bias blind spot. If anything, higher cognitive ability was associated with a larger blind spot. The mechanism. Cognitively sophisticated people have better tools for introspective rationalization. And introspection is precisely the mechanism the bias blind spot exploits. Intelligence does not reduce bias. It gives you better constructed arguments for why the bias you're demonstrating isn't actually there. The failure mode of level 2 isn't ignorance. It's sophisticated rationalization that feels indistinguishable from careful reasoning. The soldier doesn't know they're defending a position. They believe they're analyzing one. Think about the last time you were completely certain about something that mattered. How long did that certainty hold? And here's the harder version. How would you know, from the inside, whether it was level 2 certainty? There's a specific kind of person, and you've probably met one, who has an unusual habit. When they're wrong, they genuinely want to know. Not in a self-deprecating way, not to seem humble. They find it more interesting to update their position than to defend it. They ask questions that aren't designed to win. They hold their conclusions firmly enough to act on them, and loosely enough to change them. This is level 3. Not humble in the passive sense. These people are often some of the most confident thinkers in any room. What's different is structural. They've built specific practices that do what introspection alone can't. This is what the scout mindset looks like in practice. Not a personality trait, a set of behaviors. Treating each belief as a map that needs updating when the territory shifts. The key word is built. Level 3 is not achieved by learning more about biases. It's achieved by creating external structures that compensate for what internal awareness misses. Which level are you in right now? Most people watching a video about cognitive biases assume they're approaching level 3. The research says the act of assuming that is a level 2 response. The difference between level 2 and level 3 isn't how much you know. It's what you do with the uncertainty you still have. Level 2 isn't a failure. It's the exact place where everyone who has ever engaged seriously with this material ends up. The danger isn't that level 2 exists. It's that it feels exactly like level 3 from the inside. That's not a character flaw. That's the mechanism. The bias blind spot has a quality that makes it unlike most cognitive biases. It targets the mechanism you would use to detect it. With most biases, you can catch them retrospectively. You look back and recognize the distortion. The bias blind spot specifically degrades your retrospective check. The tool and the target are the same. This is the hidden cost of intellectual confidence. Not that smart people make more errors. They don't necessarily. It's that when they do make an error rooted in bias, they have significantly more compelling reasons for why it wasn't one. The certainty feels earned. That's what makes Level 2 the default state for people who have done the intellectual work. The work itself builds the confidence that the bias blind spot uses. Here's what's worth sitting with about the bias blind spot. It's not a character flaw. It's what happens when a sophisticated mind uses sophisticated tools to protect a sophisticated sense of self. That's not weakness, that's human. The 3 levels aren't a shame hierarchy, they're a map. And you now have it. The move from Level 2 to Level 3 doesn't happen by knowing more about biases. It happens by changing what you do with your beliefs, from things you hold and defend to things you test and update. That shift is structural, not motivational. You can't decide to become a scout. You build scout behaviors until they become default. Level 2 isn't the enemy. It's actually evidence that you've done the work that makes Level 3 possible. You can only update beliefs you've actually formed. The goal isn't to erase Level 2 thinking. It's to catch it in the act and know exactly what to do when you notice it. The clearest sign you're operating in Level 2 right now. You feel confident about something important, and you haven't tried to disprove it yet. The intellectual humility checklist is 3 questions, not mindset aspirations. Specific questions you ask before acting on certainty. Question 1. What would someone who genuinely disagrees with me say? And what's the strongest version of their argument? Not the version that's easy to dismiss, the strongest one. If you can't construct it, you don't fully understand your own position yet. Before sending a message you've been drafting in your head, spend 60 seconds writing down the strongest possible counterargument first. If it surprises you, your position needed it. If it's easy to dismiss, you've probably just refined the defense. Question 2. What would I need to see to change my mind? If the answer is nothing, that's not a belief, that's an identity. And identities don't update the way beliefs do. Before a difficult conversation, write down what specific evidence would genuinely shift your position. If you can't name anything, notice that. The inability to name a falsification condition is often the clearest sign you're in soldier mode. Question 3. Am I defending this position or investigating it? This is the soldier versus scout question, not about the content of what you believe, but about the posture you're bringing to it. Notice where your energy is going. Are you looking for evidence that supports your position, or evidence that challenges it? Scouts seek the latter on purpose. Philip Tetlock's 2015 research on super forecasters, the group of expert predictors who dramatically outperformed domain experts across years of tracked real-world forecasting, found that what separated the most accurate forecasters wasn't expertise. It was calibrated uncertainty, the practice of actively assigning probability to their beliefs and updating those estimates incrementally as evidence shifted. Not certainty, calibrated uncertainty. The most common way this checklist gets misused. You complete it as a ritual instead of an inquiry. You ask, what would change my mind? And spend 30 seconds generating a scenario so unlikely it effectively means nothing would. The question becomes a performance of intellectual humility rather than the actual thing. The test isn't whether you asked the question, it's whether the answer surprised you. If completing the checklist consistently confirms what you already believed, you're not using a scout tool. You're running the scout tool in soldier mode. 3 levels. Level 1. You have biases and don't know it. Level 2. You know about biases and believe that knowledge makes you less susceptible. Level 3. You've built external structures that compensate for what introspection can't catch. The move from Level 2 to Level 3 isn't intellectual, it's structural. It's not what you know, it's what you build. When you started this video, the PhD professor story probably felt like a cautionary tale about someone who should have known better. It sounds different now. She was operating exactly as designed. At level 2, where certainty is indistinguishable from clarity, and where the most prepared people in the room are often the last ones to update. What you know about bias doesn't determine which level you're in. What you do with the uncertainty you can't see, that's the variable. Next time you feel completely certain about something important, the decision, the argument, the conclusion that seems obvious, you'll know exactly what to ask. And you'll know that the question itself is the practice. Drop a 1, 2, or 3 in the comments. Which level do you honestly think you're at right now? And here's the catch. If you're completely certain of your answer, that certainty itself is data worth examining. The insight you just got about the bias blind spot connects directly to what happens when you trust your instincts instead. Intuition feels like the opposite of bias, but the mechanism underneath is almost the same. That connection is the whole next piece, and if you don't want to miss it, that's what subscribing is for.